Matthew Judon being traded from the New England Patriots to the Atlanta Falcons. Judon had been unhappy with his contract. He's 32 years old. Last year of his deal, he's been a very productive player for the Patriots, very well liked within the locker room. And, you know, look, I got something else to say about New England later and what's happening at practice or what happened at practice this week. But it's kind of a good fit. Judon for a third round pick. I think New England doesn't look like they're going to be competitive. Again, I'll get to that in a minute. In Atlanta, when you start stacking up edge rush rooms, if they had a room, they're near the bottom, right? They don't have, they have Lorenzo Carter, Arnold Ebiketie, guys that, they're okay starters. They're okay high-end backups, third pass rushers, but nobody that really can make an impact off the edge. So Atlanta making an aggressive move here, giving up that third rounder for Judon.
Yeah, a third rounder is quite a lot, particularly when there is no new deal in place. This is doesn't seem to be a Montez Sweat deal where they've got, the next contract ready to go. They sign him with the idea that immediately they're going to give him the extension. He's a part of the team. They're bringing him in. I mean, I don't want to compare it to the Hassan Reddick thing because that's been a complete train wreck for the Jets so far. But it's that style of thing. Like, they brought him in, and the reports are there are no sort of plans right now to give him this new contract, and maybe they'll adjust some money or whatever, but they're not signing him long term, at which point a third round draft pick for a 32-year-old edge rusher who's good but not great, like definitely upgrades what they have, but is not like a one-man fix to an ailing pass rush. It's quite a lot of draft capital. Like, it's a pretty high pick to give up.
32 years old today, actually, Matthew Judon's
happy birthday, Matthew.
Today. So happy birthday to Matthew Judon. He is, look, again, if you've listened to the PFF NFL podcast over the last 10 years, forgive me if I've said things like this before, but Judon is one of those guys who has the higher, the sack totals higher than the down-to-down PFF pass rush production. So over the course of his career, just looking at his pass rush grade, it's good. It's a good, solid pass rush grade. It's in the 70s. It's 59th percentile among edge rushers since entering the league in 2016. 59th percentile. That's fine, but his sack percentage is 96th percentile. So either he's that guy who is really good at finishing, has a high percentage of those cleanup sacks, those plays that, again, they probably need a little bit of help from the offense. They need the quarterback to hold the ball a little bit longer. They need someone else to create a pressure, and then you're just kind of cleaning it up. So the sack percentage is really high, but the down-to-down dominant pass rushes are slightly above average across the rest of the league. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, I think the grade does a better job of showing the player value, and that also could be part of the disconnect where there's a lot of, like, again, everybody in New England's like, hey, Judon's been the best player on the defense the last few years, and Judon's like, I got all these sacks, extend my contract. But I think the reality is he's more of like a top 32 pass rusher than a top 10 pass rusher.
And the interesting thing is those sacks, like the sort of falling into that category of like the high sack rate guy, really only happened in a couple of years of his career. Like, generally speaking, he was just a solid pass rusher who got a decent amount of pressure, a decent number of sacks, but wasn't lighting everything on fire. And then we had the first 10 sack season in Baltimore, and then we had those 2 years in New England where he, pushed it deep into the teens and was one of the sort of best sack artists in the NFL. But if you just roll up his entire career, it's all kind of pulled up by those individual seasons. It wasn't like he wasn't one of these guys that every year had way more sacks than had a disproportionate volume of sacks to pressure and to pass rushing grade and stuff. It was like it just spiked for a couple of years, and that's pulled his entire career averages up. And if you look at percentiles for all of his stuff for his entire career, basically everything is 50 to 60%, somewhere in there, and then sack rate is the 96th percentile because of those two seasons, essentially.
One other thing I'll add here, again, Judon started his career with the Ravens. He was in that Ravens hybrid 3-4 scheme for years where you've got outside backers that drop into coverage a lot. He would drop into a coverage over 100 times per season as a starter with the Ravens. Now, he hasn't done that since 2021 with the Patriots, dropped into coverage 94 times. That dropped a lot last year, but He was hurt, so that's why. But he's always been a guy 75 to 130 times a year. He's a coverage player. You don't see that from like the Boses of the world, right? So this is the old school 3-4 outside backer type and now you're going to Raheem Morris's scheme where they like that versatility. You need somebody on the edge that can drop into coverage a little bit. Lorenzo Carter, I think, can do it a touch. But I think there's a scheme fit here with Atlanta as well. With the versatility of Judon will fit well. I think for me, the bottom line, though, for New England, it's a good move. They are getting a third-round pick back here. For Atlanta, I mean, look, they're being aggressive. But from New England's perspective, Sam, I've never seen a practice report like what came out the other day for the Patriots. They got sacked, per our friend Phil Perry, 15 times on 42 dropbacks against the Eagles. 15 times. And someone else reported it was only 14, but that was like a fumbled snap or something like that. So only 14 times on 41 dropbacks. I have never heard anything like that. That if that was a real game, that would be like breaking the sack record times 4 if you projected that over the season. That was between Drake May and Jacoby Brissett. It seems like there's some serious issues in New England. So between the offensive line, it's just not a great roster. New coaching staff. Drake May's probably not ready and not in the best position. I don't think New England's going to be competitive. 3 other teams in their division look really good. So this is a good move for the Patriots to say, hey, we're probably not going to win a whole lot of games this year. Let's absolutely take a third-round pick for a 32-year-old edge rusher in the last year of his deal.
Yeah, and to be clear, that's sack rate. I mean, a high pressure rate in a game is around 40%. That's a sack rate of 34%. That's
sacked 15 times. I had to text Phil. I'm like, is this real? Like you miscounted. You absolutely miscounted. Right. But the Eagles, maybe they're the 85 Bears. Nolan Smith and Josh Sweat and Jalen Carter. Maybe they were unblockable. And it sounded like it was because of the offensive line. There was miscommunication. The QBs, like Brissett's never been great from a sack rate perspective. So those are insane numbers. And I'm not trying to, overrate one practice, but that's not a good sign for New England going into the season.
No, not at all. I mean, I feel like the deal is ultimately it's win-win, right? It's a good deal for New England because you're right. They're probably not going to be good this year. Cash in on a third-round pick for a guy that isn't going to be there long-term is something of a malcontent in that he's unhappy with his contract right now. Maybe he wouldn't have caused problems the way some other players are, but still, things aren't great between you and Matthew Judon, and if he's only going to be there this year, you might as well cash in that chip while there's an offer on the table. And then for Atlanta, okay, we said they gave up a lot. Theoretically, they're going to be good this year, so it should be a low third-round draft pick. And he does, make a massive difference to what would have been maybe the worst edge rusher situation in the NFL. There's a couple of rough ones that are there, to compete with that. But that's a bad situation in terms of generating pressure on the edge. Judon absolutely moves that forward in a fairly significant way. And, we said, look, one of the costs of spending that draft pick on Michael Penix Jr. at the top of the first round is you didn't have that pick to then spend on defensive players, which is the biggest area of weakness on this team on paper. They were hoping a guy like Braylon Trice could come in. Like Braylon Trice is down already. So it's kind of cashing in, a year early, using that third rounder, bringing it in now, and making sure that there's at least somebody on that edge rusher spot to generate some heat.